In today's video, we're going to talk all about how to recover from sensorimotor OCD. We're going to specifically talk about the big five, which is breathing, blinking, salivation, swallowing, and heartbeat. But you can plug and chug this to any sensation. Any physical sensation of anxiety, groinal responses, depersonalization, derealization. But this video specifically is going to be about how to recover from hyperfixated bodily functions. Before I go any further, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, comment down below. Let me know what you think about the video. Let me know if there's things in here you want me to cover that you haven't seen me cover before. Because there's a bunch of different aspects of sensorimotor that we don't cover too often in videos, but we cover them a lot in calls, such as hyper-awareness of your bladder, hyper-awareness of your hands or another body part, hyper-awareness of your consciousness. So if you're interested in our webinar services or coaching services, please email info@ocdrecovery.com and we will get back to you in a timely fashion. So let's jump right into it. So I have a couple different sections I'm going to talk about. And as you can see right here, we're going to talk about the big ones. So we're going to talk about breathing, saliva, swallowing, blinking, and heartbeat. I don't like to call it the big five. Now the sensation doesn't matter, which we will cover all this. It's the belief system around the sensation that really keeps the cycle going. So everything you need to know about sensorimotor OCD and how to recover. So let's do a background about who I am. So my name is Nick. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I went to undergrad and grad school in Florida, so I lived in Florida for 10 years. I got sick of the humidity and the bugs coming out of my sink. I do miss the beach because I do have the beach tattooed on my arm. It's the one thing I do miss about Florida, and the sunsets. I know that sounds really funny, but they are great in Florida. And then I moved to Colorado, where I live now for almost the last 3 years. Before I graduated grad school, so in June of 2019, that's when my OCD became 100% chronic. It was 24/7 nonstop. It started with tinnitus, so ringing in my ears. Then I went to blinking. Then I went to salivation and swallowing. And all of that stayed for about, let's say about 2.5 years. My sensorimotor stayed really bad for about 2 years. And then it was in the background for probably another 6 months here and there until I reached the place where I'm at now, which is no fear cycle whatsoever, no chronic anxiety relating to sensorimotor OCD, no matter the sensation. I've broken down the fears. I've realized life doesn't owe me anything. I realize I don't deserve to recover. I realize that it's not as horrible as I think it is, even though it would be frustrating to go back to perceived square one, because there is no such thing as square one. So after I developed tinnitus in June of 2019, I spent basically all of June, July, and August going from audiologists, reading all the information on the American Tinnitus Association website, going to the hospital, having conversations with people with cochlear implants, compulsively trying everything I could to escape the way I was feeling. So that's the cycle I was stuck in at that very, very moment. And then after that, my tinnitus went to blinking OCD, saliva and swallowing, and gag. I mean, there's really no such thing as blinking or saliva OCD. It's just you are hyperfixated on the bodily sensation because you're afraid it's going to stay forever. And then we're going to talk about all that. And then I had GAD in between, so severe physical symptoms of anxiety. That's probably the last thing to go. I still have bouts of physical symptoms of anxiety that will come and go in waves at times. Just because more than likely my nerves are still sensitized, and I've only been working on this journey for 3 years. When I talk to people who are much further ahead than me that have been working on recovery for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, around 15. When I developed sensorimotor OCD, if you've watched my previous videos, I ended up in the mental hospital. Now, it is important to highlight that most people will never need to go to a mental hospital. The only reason that people go to mental hospitals is because they don't know what to do. They don't know what tools to apply. When I went to the mental hospital, it was a reassurance, just, brigade, take this, take that, we're going to stabilize you, so forth, so forth, so forth, and all of that as well. So it's super key. I got Daisy underneath me, so if you see where my hand is, I'm scratching my very, very needy pit bull. And that's basically what happened with that. The video games were the largest avoidance behavior I was partaking in. So I was constantly avoiding everything, avoiding work. If I went to work, I would go in late or leave early. I wouldn't do really what I needed to do for that particular job, and so forth and so forth and so forth, until I left and started my own business, which then became its own compulsive nightmare because I did everything I could to avoid anything that was uncomfortable, conversations with certain people, didn't want to do this, didn't want to do that, etc., etc., etc. So all of that is kind of who I am. and where I am today, which is there's no sensory motor cycle whatsoever. It's like it never even happened. And even when it does pop up here and there, because it will, because it is genetic more than likely, I know how to handle that in a very rational way. So it's very, very key to talk about. So the second thing I want to talk about is what is sensorimotor OCD? What is it? First of all, it's also known as somatic OCD, also known as hyperawareness. So it's a total fixation on a bodily function. The big five I talked about up here: breathing, saliva, swallowing, blinking, heartbeat, your bladder, anything else that's a normal physiologic function that's going to be with you for the remainder of your life. It's very, very key to cover. The sensation isn't the issue. That's not the main issue. It is part of the issue. It is part of the activating event, which we'll talk about over here, but it's not the primary reason why the cycle continues. The main reason the cycle continues is your belief system. So I always tell people, no matter who you're working with sensorimotor OCD, whether you have a fear of breathing, salivating, swallowing, blinking, your heartbeat, if you're not spending the majority of your time breaking down the belief system, you're doing yourself a disservice. And you might want to look for a second and third, fourth, fifth opinion wherever you've been, because this is the main thing. So what keeps the cycle going is our beliefs, like I said, which we're going to cover a lot of those. The compulsions and avoidance behaviors. Compulsions and avoidance behaviors are basically the same thing. They're rituals, things that we do to not feel anxiety, to not feel discomfort, to keep us basically safe, the perception of safety. And then trying to force recovery, so trying to force acceptance. You know, stuff we hear all the time. Oh, I tried that. I tried acceptance. It didn't work for me. Oh, that doesn't work for me. There's actually no such thing as acceptance not working for someone. It's just a matter of realizing that acceptance is an internal surrender. It's not a doing. It's an actual state of being. And that's very, very key to cover. Very, very important. So where I want to spend the remainder of the video is how to recover, because there's a lot of content out there where people are explaining sensorimotor OCD, but they're not actually breaking down what needs to be done in order to actually recover. So in the Ellis principles, we have A plus B equals C. Okay, so we have the activating event, belief systems, and then C, which is an emotional consequence, which has behaviors and emotions. So this will be the unhealthy cycle that I'm about to talk about. The cycle that perpetuates the sensorimotor fear cycle, and why it continues to, basically, the engine continues to run. So the activating event is sensorimotor OCD, any sensation you can think of. So plug in the big five. The belief systems, the main belief system that every sensorimotor sufferer has is: one, if I notice my sensation for the rest of my life is ruined / horrible. And two, if I notice my sensation for the rest of my life, I'll never be able to be present again, and that is horrible, which are pretty much the same thing, just said in two different ways. And those are the main ones. Now, if breathing is in there, some of the other beliefs are: what happens if I have to control my manual breathing for the rest of my life? That's horrible. What if I forget how to breathe and I pass out and die? So sometimes there are some health-related belief systems that can be tied in to the breathing one, which we will cover in one-on-one coaching and webinar services. So, you know, if you're interested in, again, any of those webinar services coming up on sensorimotor, we work with a lot of sensorimotor people. I would say we work with the most because of our direct experience with sensorimotor. I have over a dozen people with sensorimotor in with me right now, who all have come in for particular reasons that they've tried moving with uncertainty. They've tried going with, you know, exposing themselves to the sensation. But the reason is the sensation is not the primary problem, the belief system is. So you could meditate to your breathing all day long. If you're still afraid you're gonna breathe, you're gonna notice your breathing for the rest of your life, it's not gonna bring you to recovery. So now, how do you dispute this? So we talked about the A plus B equals C, the negative side. So the activating event, sensorimotor, the belief, if I notice this forever, my life is ruined. And then the consequence. And the consequence is the emotion: more hyper-awareness, panic, anxiety, depression, depersonalization, derealization. And then the behaviors are the compulsions and the avoidance behaviors. That's the unhealthy cycle. Now, I didn't have enough room to write the healthy cycle on here, but let's go through that. So now what we want to do is we want to go into part number 2, which is disputing and developing what we call our effective new philosophy. So let's go over some of the disputing questions. They are, I love it. She's just like, what are you talking about? Or why are you talking about sensorimotor for the 8,000th time? So the disputing questions are: where is the evidence to support that noticing anxiety, noticing my sensations are is 100% terrible. Well, there's no evidence. It's just in my head. It's just, it's not in my head in the way where you're trying to prove it. It's just the belief is in my head where I think that it's horrible. But it's not. It's frustrating. It's definitely not the most enjoyable, but it's not horrible like I imagine. Disputing question number 2. What would happen if I gave this belief up? Well, if I gave this belief up, what are some of the things that could happen? Well, maybe I remain hyper aware for the rest of my life. In the background, 30%, 40%. But if I don't have that top onion layer where I'm as scared as I was before, maybe it won't be as catastrophically bad in my perception. I'll be able to do things in my life with it in the background without trying to fight it away. And where is the belief that states that I can't stand it? Well, I can stand it because I'm here right now. So all of this ties into developing that new effective philosophy, which looks like this. I would prefer, I'll use breathing for the remainder of these examples, but you plug in whatever the sensation is for you. I would prefer to not notice my breathing for the rest of my life, but as I'm a human and I'm going to breathe for the rest of my life, even if I'm hyper aware at times, it's not the end of the world. Even if it feels like I have to manually breathe for the remainder of my life, it's not as terrible as I could imagine. There are other people out there who have far worse prognoses and are in far worse situations. Genocides, Auschwitz, World War I, II, Vietnam War, Civil War, all major catastrophes and famines and starvations and plagues. So noticing my sensations for the rest of my life is pretty damn good. That's how you gotta start breaking that down. The third part is exposures are not needed when it comes in the way that we imagine. Now, if you are avoiding work because of your breathing, you have to go back to work and expose yourself to being at work with your breathing. But that's not the exposures we're talking about. We're talking about direct exposures to your sensation, direct mindfulness of your sensation. Is there a time and place? Let's say someone comes in and they are so fucking scared of their breathing. Having them spend 10 minutes a day just allowing themselves to notice their breathing can have some applicability to bring the fear cycle down a little bit. But it's not going to unlatch it because the belief of noticing it forever is still the dominant factor. That's the engine. I always use the example of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 adult onset diabetes is caused by, yes, some genetics, but primarily unhealthy lifestyle factors. Okay? Where type 1 diabetes, the person doesn't have insulin that works in their pancreas. Completely different. They take insulin for the rest of their lives. Type 2 is called adult onset diabetes. So the symptoms can be diabetic neuropathy, pins and needles in their leg. The markers they use are A1C and blood glucose. Those symptoms, which is the hyper-awareness itself, that is the symptom, is not the genesis of the cycle. The genesis of type 2 diabetes is an unhealthy lifestyle factor. The genesis of sensorimotor OCD is the belief system that noticing my sensation for the rest of my life is horrible. This is how you actually start to break that down. Yes, obviously creating some distance between your breathing, for an example, is key, but it's not the primary reason why the cycle continues. And that is so key. So I see it all the time. I'm going in to get help for sensorimotor. They're having me do all these exposures. And you're saying to me, why am I still stuck? Well, you're still stuck because you're still so afraid of noticing your sensations for the rest of your life, which would perpetuate that cycle. It's totally understandable why the cycle would continue if that's what the fear is. The fourth thing is bringing down avoidance and compulsions. There's a lot of them. Working, chewing on gum, chewing on ice cubes, self-reassuring statements. Everyone breathes. That's something I've read from the big places. A lot of people who have talked about sensorimotor that don't understand it, that come in and they ask me, yeah, but I've been saying to myself, it's okay, everyone breathes. That's a self-reassuring statement. If you're saying that all the time, you don't need to speak to yourself like that. Every once in a while, you can say, oh, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. But constantly saying everyone breathes, you're trying to prove to yourself why it's okay that you're suffering. And that's not going to do you any good. That is so key to cover. The fifth thing is time and practice. Can't be forced. You have to let the foot off the gas sometimes and just live. A lot of times with sensorimotor, because it's not going anywhere, that sensation's in you for the rest of your life. I give people a 2-3 month homework assignment to not really work on disputing, bring down the compulsive behaviors and avoidance, but you can work on OCD recovery in many ways. You don't need to dispute right now. Why don't you just go out there and feel uncomfortable? Just live your life. Just feel uncomfortable and live your life. That's what I want you to do. That is so key. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to comment down below. Let me know what you think about it. I love this topic. I think it's a really good topic. And again, if you're interested in any of our webinar and coaching services, please email info@ocdrecovery.com. Let me see if I can. Come here, boo. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. They want to see you. Ooh, they want to see you. Oh. And if you want to see Daisy on one of the webinars, you let me know. Who's that? You got to say bye-bye. You're going to say bye-bye. Bye-bye. She's got all these sunspots on her now because she just lays outside. You can't get skin cancer on me because then mommy is going to have a meltdown. And I'm going to have to deal with the consequences. So I'm going to have to deal with the $20,000 vet bill. You know what I mean? Then I'm going to have to live under a bridge with Momin. She's like, what are you even talking about right now? So, thank you so much again. As always, don't forget to laugh and have fun. This journey can be serious the way it is. Again, have a great day.